The story of Dr. Fentanyl is the story of a doctor and a pharmacist who conspired together to basically pump thousands of fentanyl patches onto the street.
Let me set up the first part of our story on Dr. Fentanyl. His real name is Dr. Otto, and he started prescribing fentanyl patches to Sean Holmes and his girlfriend.
They both had prescriptions for 90 fentanyl patches each. So imagine a person on the street being legally able to carry 90 patches on them.
Sean started to work with Lirodon Imirovic. The deal was simple. Dr. Otto would write a prescription for a box of 30 fentanyl patches, using the names provided by Imirovic. It had to be real names to log into the NMS, the new medicine service. The pharmacist would fill the prescriptions, then Imirovic would meet up with Sean and exchange the drugs for cash. The patches would be stripped of their labels to avoid connecting them to Dr. Otto or the pharmacist. Dr. Otto took home $33,000 in 1 month from this scheme. The cash helped pay for his extravagant lifestyle that he had set up for himself and his family. He had no idea who was using the fentanyl patches, who was overdosing, and who was dying. Before we tell you more of the story, there is one thing I'm always interested in. Who was Sean Holmes?
My son was a man who had the biggest heart you could ever imagine, but he fell into the problems of addiction. My first feeling about Sean, who passed away at 34 years of age, was that he had an addiction to money, to fast money. I was told by a principal back in grade 8 that Sean was probably the slickest and best drug dealer that he's seen. This is in grade 8. So going back, I mean, unfortunately, Sean came from a dysfunctional family. His mother and I separated when he was 4 years old. So that didn't help. The guidance really wasn't there. I was only able to see him once every 2 weeks and only able to talk to him once every 2 Sunday nights. So every second Sunday night, which made it difficult as being a good father. But Sean, I really feel that he got involved in it for the money. He liked material things and it was quick money for him. And he got into that business, unfortunately, and then I believe the addiction came after that into his drug of choice was fentanyl.
The police got a tip that Sean Holmes was the primary source, that he was bringing in drugs from the Greater Toronto area. Detective Nick Ibbett ran the investigation as a drug investigator with 27 years experience on the force. His goal was to take down the people who were selling the fentanyl on the street and the people above the dealers. They had collected a lot of metadata over a variety of months. Metadata in this case is where the calls originated, who was called, without knowing what was said in the calls.
And using that metadata, which is the length of calls, the subscriber phone numbers, helped us to reach to the point of the stakeout. So all of that historical information that I just mentioned gave us a landscape of how these people were interacting, and then our physical surveillance, watching the dealers interact with the people they're selling to, as well as the interaction between the networks of people, allowed us to get to the stage of the final takedown.
So you had all your information, and what came next?
And once we knew things were going to happen, that's when I put in place the manpower and resources to do the takedown, writing the search warrants, applying for the search warrants to be granted to execute. And that all took place within that day of Sean Holmes coming down to meet our main target in the Vaughan area. And we had an idea, based on all that other stuff, what hotel he was going to meet.
You arrested Sean Holmes and Imarovic.
At the arrest and subsequent search warrants, in particularly the hotel room that Sean Holmes and Miss Boudreau were staying in, we found fentanyl boxes that had prescription labels that identified Dr. Otto and the pharmacist that was the focus of our investigation, Shireen Al-Azraq.
Before the night was out, officers headed across town to knock on the pharmacist's door. She answered and was arrested immediately. They seized 3 cell phones, plus $18,000 in bundles of cash from a dresser. By noon the following day, more than $75,000 in cash and roughly $89,000 worth of drugs were sitting in police custody. A complex web emerged with a straight line leading back to Dr. Otto. 2 months after the arrest of the pharmacist, the police finally had enough evidence to arrest Dr. Otto.
It wasn't until I really got into this story and really deep into investigating Dr. Otto's actions and the pharmacist's actions that I started to realize that they weren't the only ones doing this, that really Dr. Fentanyl was the only one who went to jail, but he was one of actually several doctors who were connected with that one pharmacist selling fentanyl onto the black market, knowingly putting fentanyl patches onto the street.
How did you find out that more doctors were involved?
So when we executed the search warrants and effected the arrest of Lirdon Imarovic, we were provided more information that identified other parties involved, which was ultimately our investigative goal, was to dismantle the network of people that were involved in this particular investigation.
It took 3 years for the figures of the fentanyl ring to make their way to the courts. Sean was the first one on trial, pleading guilty to a trafficking charge in 2017. He already spent time in prison on previous charges and begged the court not to send him back. He was terrified. He said, "I'm asking you today to help to save my life." Despite his pleas, he was sentenced to 6.5 years in prison. And here is the most essential part of the story. When systems, if they're not supported, are breaking down. First, when Sean had served his sentence. He attended all of his parole meetings.
He was never involved in any violent crimes, never ever had any weapons, nothing of that nature at all. It was all strictly drug dealing because that was the fast money. You'd never find Sean robbing anybody or putting a knife on anybody, or that just wasn't his game. He just wasn't there. So when there's no violence involved, parole doesn't seem to take a real serious look at that. And so when you're in for what might be a meeting every 2 weeks, then it drops off to every month, and then it drops off to every 2 months, and then before you know it, the support is not there anymore because they're trying to wean you off and get you into society, into being a good citizen as fast as they can. And sometimes, obviously in this case, too fast.
The pharmacist got sentenced to 13 years in prison. She's out on bail and appealing her sentence. Dr. Otto's case didn't reach the courts until 2019. And in the intervening time, the College of Physicians and Surgeons launched an internal investigation against him.
The college didn't feel that they had the regulatory power to deal with this. up to a point. They do believe that they have the legislation in place now through an act that came through the Ontario legislature in 2019, I believe, that would address this issue. So he was still able to continue. He was licensed, almost like Sean Holmes was in jail, and Dr. Otto was still a licensed physician in the province of Ontario.
Finally, in February 2019, he was suspended, not for drug trafficking, but for lousy record keeping. Dr. Otto's criminal trial finally began in June of 2019. The Crown argued that he turned to trafficking fentanyl late in his career to deal with his financial struggles. The jury didn't buy it. They found Dr. Otto guilty of trafficking. At the trial, the name of 5 other doctors emerged. 5 doctors linked to pharmacist El Arzak and appearing to be trafficking fentanyl on the street. Out of jail, Sean tried to put his life back on track.
Like if you are an inmate, chances are you are going to get help because there's 24-hour help there for you all the time when you're inside. But when you're outside, it's a lot more difficult when you're trying to satisfy parents, you're trying to live a clean life with a job, and yet there's still that craving, there's still that addiction. And Sean would go to a counselor, but very difficult to get in to see a counselor. You can't just call and they'll have you there in 5 minutes, So there's a lack of support. He kept to himself for a few days, from what I understand. We used to talk to each other quite often, every day, and lining up what he was going to do for the next day, going to get some metal roofing for the camp and taking the trailer and going to get that, and he was all set. And I got a call from his girlfriend at the time that there had been an accident. There was some activity went on about 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, and Sean was pronounced dead at 7:15 in the morning in his own vehicle. I can guarantee you, not of any suicide.
How many times have we heard this story in the past years? And Brett, what happened to Dr. Otto, or let's call him by his name that you call him in the article, what happened to Dr. Fentanyl?
It was 2 days after he disappeared that his wife called the police to file a missing persons report. So there was no monitoring on him, at least for those 2 days that he used to disappear from the country.
It's astounding.
It's a failure of the medical profession it's a regulation failure. I don't know if I would say it's a police failure, but there's a limitation on what the police did. Then there's the justice system, which failed by essentially granting the man parole. He got away. He fled the country, having spent less than 2 weeks in prison. The doctor who had the heaviest sentence out of all of this didn't spend really any time in jail.
Not even have an ankle bracelet on the man, he's been sentenced to 12 years. You just don't sentence a man to 12 years in jail for no matter what the crime is. As far as I'm concerned, he got sentenced to 12 years for murder. That's how I feel as a father, because if he hadn't been involved in this, there's a good chance my son could still be alive. I know for some people it might be a hard puzzle to put together, but when you spend the hours and hours and hours that I do thinking about all this, I think that man got away with murder. And the extradition order should be brought forward.
So Nick, what about the police and the opiate crisis?
And the way I would answer that, Nick, is that the police are just a small part of this big cog of ways in which we can tackle the challenge of opiate crisis. So do the police have adequate resources to tackle the opiate crisis? The fair answer is no, because there's only so much the police can do, because there is more than just the opiate crisis that law enforcement is dealing with. So I understand the criticism that might come from the public, that not enough is being done, but I also look at it from the point of view, being on the side of the fence of trying to tackle this problem, is that you will never have enough through one agency.
Anybody who's been fortunate enough not to be impacted by it is truly fortunate, because it's not an invisible problem. It's in every city in this country.